The self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic in eastern Ukraine has taken a significant step forward in its separatist stance by declaring a new nation called Malorossia, or Little Russia, a successor to Ukraine.
We, representatives of regions of former Ukraine, offer to re-establish the state and in place of the former Ukraine, based on historical premises, to create the country of Malorossia. In this case, renaming the country is critically important, as Ukraine as a state is guilty of war crimes, mass terror, and violence against its own people.
Russian President Vladimir Putin's spokesman says that statement was Zakharchenko's own personal initiative, and Moscow learnt about it from the press. But Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko says the pro-Russian separatists wouldn't have acted without the Kremlin knowing.
They are not political figures. They are Muppet shows, which translated and the messages they received from Russia.
The declaration from Donetsk may be on paper, but it's part of the ongoing crossfire in the conflict, which has seen Russian-backed separatists in Luhansk and Donetsk try to break away from Ukraine. The Kremlin says it's committed to the 2015 Minsk II peace agreement signed by Russia, Ukraine, Germany and France. It's meant to deliver a full bilateral ceasefire on both sides before a political solution is reached. The creation of Little Russia would be a direct violation of the deal, which is meant to reinstate full Ukrainian sovereignty. The war has now claimed more than 10,000 lives since it began in 2014. And this latest escalation between Kiev and Russian-backed rebels in Ukraine's east appears to be making the prospect of a reunited and peaceful nation a much more distant reality. Natalie Pohanen, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from New York is Andrei Dobryansky. He's an executive board member of the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America. And from Moscow, Leonid Safin. He's a chief editor at Geopolitica and the Journal of Eurasian Affairs. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Andrei, this Alexander Zakharchenko, is he a nobody or is he somebody whose words you're taking seriously?
Both he and his words are nothing to take seriously. He is a puppet, as the Ukrainian president pointed out. He can be replaced at an instant from Putin's words. That's how the power vertical works. The structures throughout Russia or the territories it controls come directly from the Kremlin, and anything that a lower peon says, such as Zakharchenko, means nothing in the scope of the world. This is not a major declaration, but a PR stunt made to give them some attention while Ukraine has been winning this war for several months.
Okay, Leonid, is Ukraine winning the war, and this is why Putin's trying to send a message through Zakharchenko, as Andrei sees it?
I think we need to see this message like a multi-layer attempt to see from historical point of view, from symbolical point of view, and to enlarge frame of current discussion about future of the Ukraine. Because the situation there is very bad, and ceasefire not stopped, and Kiev not follows Minsk agreement. So it's some kind of rebranding of the process. In 2014, for example, there was project of Novorossiya that is similar like Malorossia. And now we see its attempt to bring more attention what happens there exactly in Lugansk People Republic, in Donetsk People Republic. It's not depends of Moscow. I think it depends more on people in the region and what happens there.
Okay, but Leonid, you said something interesting because you started off with, I think this message means. So I'm interested to hear your perspective. Do you believe that this was actually from the Kremlin? Because the Kremlin says, hey, we had nothing to do with this. We read about it in the papers. We don't know what's going on. Nothing to do with us in the peace process. Do you agree that this was actually a message from the Kremlin and that they're lying about having nothing to do with it?
I think it is a very high kind of art to understand political intentions, and maybe Mr. Zakharchenko to understand ideas of Mr. Putin, for example, and he just to speak something that Mr. Putin thinks. But I cannot, for example, to speak about ideas from the Putin's brain. And maybe Mr. Zakharchenko can do it, I don't know.
No, but I mean, it's very clear. I just want to ask you if you think Moscow was sending that message rather than just Mr. Zakharchenko on his own.
No, I think Moscow not deal with this kind of message. Moscow act in more direct way. For example, the real political negotiation, like in Minsk, for example, and like we do it in Syria with the United States and with Turkey and with Iran.
Okay, Andrei, do you agree with that?
I think that it's obvious that this comes from Putin. This is happening at the same time that the Russian forces are mobilizing the largest war games that they have since Soviet times, mobilizing militarized armored divisions of tanks up against the Russian border in a manner that hasn't been seen since the Cold War. This attempt in Ukraine, this little PR stunt, is just another facet of trying to scare the West in getting a better negotiation deal by Mr. Putin.
Leonid, is this a tactic to scare the West?
I think from American point of view, Russia is some kind of aggressor, but from Russian point of view, we just would like to defend itself. And any kind of military drills on the Russian territory or in any border, for example, in Kaliningrad and Sklav, it's our domestic right to do what we would like to do. And United States, for example, to use European partners and just to conduct Atlantic resolve maneuvers already for 2 years in European countries. So yes, it's kind of time of a Cold War that we just try to defend itself and defend our people. And from United States point of view, we just to continue our behavior. Maybe it's not normal for Washington, but from Moscow point of view, it's normal. And some kind of attacks and some kinds of actions in Syria, in Ukraine, and already organized coup in Ukraine from Washington and Brussels with assistance of Washington politicians, it's not normal.
Okay.
So we have two different points of view.
This is laughable,
politics.
Imran.
Come in, Andrei.
This is laughable to call Russia a friend and not the aggressor when it has military forces on several countries outside of its borders. You don't have to go to 2 territories in Ukraine where there's an armored and military occupation of Ukrainian territory. You can go next door to Georgia where there is also 2 territories with a military invasion and still occupied to this day in contravention to any peace deal that was signed afterwards. Same thing with Moldova, same thing with Azerbaijan. The list goes on and on and on. And what kind of a peaceful nation decides to shoot down an innocent jetliner? We have 3 years now since MH17 was shot down by a Russian rocket, and still nothing has happened from that. That is not the action of a peaceful nation.
Okay, so Leonid, that's not defensive, that's aggressive.
Ukrainian side not confirmed that Russian military troops were presented in Ukraine anytime. He just to provide some kind of rhetoric, no any facts, no any confirmations that Russian troops were in Ukraine territory. But besides some kind of very loud words about sovereignty and that Russia just organized aggression against Ukraine, for example, I would like to remind Kosovo precedent. Where is the sovereignty right of Yugoslavia, for example, when the United States supported Albanian terrorists in Kosovo?
That's a good point.
It's
Yeah, but this is the thing. You're not debating anybody who brought up Kosovo. Andrei didn't bring up Kosovo, right? So we're talking about Ukraine's sovereignty here. They feel that you're trying to swallow up half their country in the east, and you have swallowed up and annexed Crimea and are trying to establish facts on the ground and borderization. So Kosovo argument aside, you would understand why a Ukrainian nationalist would see, even if there aren't any Russian troops in their country, even if we grant you that it is clear that Moscow is arming and funding pro-Moscow separatists in the east. You'd agree with that, right, Leonid?
International rights based on precedent. So we need to remember Kosovo, what happened there. We also can to remember Cuba, for example, and Guantanamo Bay still occupied by American forces. If you will speak about Ukraine, that from point of view that Ukrainian nation is friendly nation to Russians, we just would like to protect people there in Donetsk and Lugansk Republic. So it's a reason why Russia to provide, for example, humanitarian assistance to there and would like to stop what happens there.
Okay. Yep. Interesting point. Certainly point. Yeah. Okay. Let me bring in Andrei, because Andrei, this is interesting. I just want to talk about Crimea for a second as an example of the rest of the conflict, right? So Russia annexes Crimea. Nobody recognizes that annexation except for 6 countries: Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Syria, North Korea, and curiously Afghanistan, but that's something to go in a little bit later on. Nobody recognizes it, yet it still continues. Nobody's willing to do anything about it, even though they don't recognize it. With that in mind, are you prepared psychologically? Are you willing to accept that at some point these facts on the ground will be exactly that, facts on the ground, and the east of Ukraine will be Russian?
Right. The West does not accept this. Ukraine does not accept this. It's not just all those almost 200 countries that don't accept this false annexation, illegal annexation of Crimea, except for that small smattering you talked about. It's also every single international institution does not accept that. No banking institution will recognize any transactions done in Crimea. You cannot send a mail because international postal regulations will not send something directly to Crimea.
But Andrei, nobody's done anything about it.
Because the International Aviation Found. I'm saying that this is how much it's not recognized. So the fact that you're saying that at some point we need to recognize a de facto status, that's not how the rest of the world exists and functions. And frankly, the fact that the UN Charter has been violated in such a gross way demands that some action happen. We understand that the United Nations Security Council has been stymied by the veto of Russia to do something further. But the fact that the sanctions still remain and continue to remain must mean something in the international community. And we also cannot forget the plight of the indigenous peoples and the human rights abuses that are happening in Crimea day by day. Human rights monitors are denied access to critical areas of Crimea. We cannot get relief for, again, the indigenous peoples who are being wiped off Crimea, their language, their culture. They don't even have the right to assemble anymore in Crimea. That's not something that the rest of the world is ready to stomach at this point.
Right. Leonid, let me ask you, do you want for the rest of the east of Ukraine what's happening in Crimea?
I think not only east of Ukraine, but many regions would like to join with Russia. It's because not only situation there is very worse in Ukraine itself, but because half of Ukraine there is Russian population. They speak Russian language, and conflict started just because Ukrainian nationalists started repressions against the people who already have Russian identity. There is right of people to protect itself. It's market in
certainly, Leonid.
Charter of United
You brought
Nations.
up Kosovo, so let me then bring in another historical analogy. Hitler did that with the Sudetenland. He said, those people, they speak German. They're not in our country, but they're German. They have German identity. They speak German, so I'm going to go and swallow it up. Isn't it the same?
No, I think we need to see every case separated. For example, many nations, recognized nations, there is not people who speak only one language, for example. In Poland, we can find the different kind of ethnic groups. In Germany, we can find different ethnic groups. And in the United States, of course, there is Spanish language people and English language people. And I think it's kind of melting pot in the United States. And there is a problem with the international institution itself because it's mostly based on Western paradigm and main conductor there is United States.
Okay, but
And
you
what
say there's
happens
a
now,
you
it's
say there's a
just,
problem. It's interesting that you say there's a problem with the international institutions, but it's Russia's veto on the UN Security Council that prevents anything from happening when people want to do something about Crimea and the war in the Donbass. Let me move this forward a little bit now and ask you, Andrei, about the status quo. I've been reading some of the OSCE reports. It seems as if every day there's a ceasefire violation, and sometimes it's the Ukrainians, sometimes, or a lot of the time, it's the rebels in the east. Is it, I guess, Andrei, maybe normal for Russia to expect the status quo to go on, given that they don't have to pay so much of a price? And what does that mean for Ukraine then, Andrei?
Well, there are many prices being paid by Russia and by Ukraine. You mentioned the violations. You can just talk about what happened overnight. Grad rockets, tank fire, artillery being fired on Ukrainian positions, and 4 Ukrainian soldiers were killed in the last 24 hours. That follows on a soldier who was shot by a sniper the day before. Russia's violations keep on going day by day, which is why nobody can agree to a ceasefire with Russia, because we know they're going to fire increasingly. However, what Russia has learned is that Russia's forces, Russia's actual soldiers who have been captured, and they are in Ukrainian television every day because there are so many Russian commanders on Ukraine's territory trying to get more and more of Ukraine, but they cannot do that. They haven't been successful since they tried their push in 2014. And Ukraine's army, within a matter of months, was able to stop them. They have not been. Russia has not been able to go forward since that time, and Ukraine's army has only gotten stronger and stronger. So the fact that Ukraine has continued to modernize itself, continue to increase the force of its army, which is now the largest army within Europe, the fact that this modern country now has a visa-free regime can even be demonstrated by Zakharchenko's own words, where he says that he wants to declare his own country, and yet he would like a visa-free regime that Ukraine has negotiated with Europe. Perhaps it is the Russians who would like to live in Ukraine, where there's a little bit more freedom. And perhaps it's Russia which denies people the right of their own language, wherein the main library of Ukrainian culture in Moscow was shut down. There are no Ukrainian schools that are able to operate within Russia, even though that's the largest of our diasporas with over 1 million Ukrainians living in Russia. We're not allowed our own schools. We're not allowed our own libraries. That's where people are being repressed because of their ethnicity. It's not in Ukraine.
Okay, Leonid, that was a lot. It was passionate. It was very strong. Surely you must accept some of that?
Actually, I not see problem with Ukrainians in Russia, and many labor migrants working there, and also many refugees there from Ukraine going to Russia to live. So Russia to provide assistance like peaceful nation, like you told. Problem is we can back to the year of coup, because it was organized by the West in Russia. And the United States and European Union responsible for this coup. They invested a lot of billions of dollars just to organize different kind of group who started this operation in Kyiv and other cities. And of course, we need to remember 2004 when started first Orange Revolution. This was also idea, I think it's idea fix of Zbigniew Brzezinski, who told that Ukraine must be engaged by the West. It will be some kind of future belt of European security.
Okay.
But it is fake.
So,
and,
okay, but that's what you believe.
Ukrainian
that's what you believe
media
as the
provide
background.
fake news about
but
Russia.
Surely, Leonid, that's what you believe as the background. Opinions differ about what happened at Maidan, what happened in terms of people's intentions. But would you accept that someone like Andrei is not a puppet of the West? He's a Ukrainian who is proud of his country and doesn't want to be under the boot of Russia. Can Andrei, as a patriotic, nationalistic Ukrainian, exist in your eyes?
I think it's will of Ukrainian people what to do next, and Russia will not intervene. If Ukraine would like to join European Union, no problem, why not? It depends on Ukrainian people. But problem is that political elite now controlled by West, and they not follow will of people. And in Ukrainian constitution, we can read that Ukrainian power based on the people. Mm-hmm. So it's violation of Ukrainian constitution itself.
Okay.
So it's a main problem what happens there in Ukraine.
Okay, Andrei, very finally, next week, representatives of Ukraine, Russia and the separatists meeting in Minsk. Can anything good come out of that, given the facts on the ground, given that everybody so fundamentally differs on where to go next in this conflict? Are you optimistic at all, Andrei?
I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of why should we be optimistic if it's the same people coming to the table, if it's the same situation on the ground, basically. I would say that Ukraine keeps bettering its army, keeps integrating itself every day more and more with the West. Ukraine has been, deployed on NATO missions for 20 years now. So it's a much more Western-focused country. It's a much more Western-focused economy. It's been bouncing back in terms of its own power. And really, it's on Russia now to figure out what its course is going to be. They have a presidential election coming next year. It's on Russia to demonstrate an openness to international monitors, to show an openness to maybe having a free press, which it's not allowed to have. It should be on Russia's table now to prove itself to want to be a member of the international community, because it's not a Western conspiracy when over 190 nations see that Russia has been violating territorial integrity of other countries. Small island states are not part of the Western alliance or conspiracy. Okay. This is the rest of the world acknowledging that there is one trouble area, and that is the presidency of Vladimir Putin.
Okay, Andrei and Leonid, it's been good to talk. I've got to wrap. Thank you very much for joining us.